How would you react if your husband showed up to your funeral with his mistress? Imagine a church packed with 200 grieving people, a polished mahogany casket holding a pregnant woman who died suspiciously. Then, the main doors fly open, and in walks her husband, holding hands with the woman he'd been seeing for months. But there was a secret no one in that church knew. The woman in the coffin was not a victim. She was a brilliant strategist. While everyone believed she was a humble elementary school teacher creating lessons about butterflies, she was quietly building a $47 million business. As her husband schemed to take everything and disappear with his lover, she was recording every lie, every illegal act, every single betrayal. She left behind a video to be played at her own funeral, a video designed to ruin everyone who ever thought she was weak. What comes next will leave you speechless. You need to stick around for this, because nobody could have predicted the final twist, not even me. This is the story of Rachel Morrison, and it is about how a woman from beyond the grave claimed the ultimate victory. This story will teach you one powerful truth. Your silence is not weakness, it's strategy. Every quiet woman who's been underestimated, every person who's been told they're nothing without someone else, this is your reminder that patience and preparation can defeat power and privilege. Stay until the end, because the final revelation will change how you see strength forever. The mahogany casket rested at the altar of St. Andrew's Church, a somber monument to a life cut short. It was framed by bouquets of white lilies, and the gentle flicker of candlelight sent shadows dancing on its glossy surface. 200 people filled the old wooden pews, a sea of black clothing, their faces marked by the unique sorrow of losing someone so young. The air was heavy, with the fragrance of flowers and expensive cologne, but underneath it all was a stronger feeling of shared disbelief. Inside that beautiful casket, which cost more than a year's salary for most, lay Rachel Morrison, an elementary school teacher who was 32 years old. She was a loyal friend, an expecting mother, and now she was gone. I was in the third row, clutching a tissue that was already soaked, my black dress suddenly feeling constricting around my heart, where sorrow had settled like a stone. I am Claire Bennett, and the woman in that casket was more than just my friend. She was my sister in every sense that counted. We had been inseparable since we were 7. My partner through every high and low life had presented to us for 25 years. A quarter of a century of friendship, of secrets shared under the cover of darkness, of comforting tears and shared joy, of phone calls that stretched into the morning, and Sunday brunches where we'd fix the world's problems with mimosas and waffles. All of that was finished, ending here in this cold church with high, arched ceilings and stained glass windows whose vibrant scenes of hope felt like a cruel joke. Rachel was 8 months pregnant when she passed away. She was carrying a little girl she had already decided to name Hope. The baby miraculously survived, delivered via an emergency cesarean section just as her mother's life was slipping away. Weighing 4 pounds and 2 ounces, she was a tiny fighter in the neonatal intensive care unit, completely oblivious that she would never meet the woman who had adored her so much, who had sung to her every night, and who had spent weeks choosing the perfect sunny yellow for her nursery. The official cause of death was complications. The doctors used vague terms like sudden infection, rapid organ failure, and unprecedented decline. They would shake their heads and murmur about how some things are unexplainable, how modern medicine has its limits, and how they did everything they could. But I knew better. I knew Rachel had been perfectly healthy throughout her pregnancy. I knew she had been glowing with the special kind of light that surrounds expectant mothers. I knew she was full of life and energy, making plans for a long future that she deserved to have. And I was absolutely certain, with a conviction that settled deep in my stomach, that something was terribly wrong with how quickly her health had failed. The priest was delivering his eulogy, his voice a soothing, practiced rhythm of scripture that flowed over the mourners. He talked about God's mysterious ways, about eternal peace, and the promise of seeing loved ones again in the afterlife. I barely registered his words. My gaze was locked on the coffin, on the arrangement of white roses lying on its lid, and on a nearby photo of Rachel looking her absolute best, smiling warmly with a hand on her pregnant stomach. It was at that moment the large wooden doors at the back of the church creaked open. The sound ripped through the sanctuary, silencing the priest's gentle sermon. Every single person in the church turned to see what caused the disturbance. The bright afternoon sun pouring in from the entrance created a silhouette of two figures. Marcus Morrison entered his wife's funeral as if he were arriving late to an inconvenient business lunch. He wore a charcoal gray suit that easily cost $3,000. His dark hair was perfectly in place, and his expression showed the easy confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his entire 35 years. He stood tall, walked with a deliberate pace, and wore a look that could almost seem sad if you didn't see the coldness in his eyes. But it wasn't Marcus who caused a collective gasp to sweep through the church. It was the woman on his arm. Jessica Crane walked into that service holding Marcus's hand as if she had every right to be there, as if she was the grieving widow and not the other woman, the mistress who had destroyed a home and slept with a married man while his wife was carrying his child. She was 28, with the kind of expensive blonde hair that takes all day at a salon to perfect. She was beautiful in that calculated way that suggests a personal trainer, a strict diet, and a skincare regimen that costs a fortune. Her black dress was a designer label, probably a Valentino, tailored to flaunt her physique while pretending to be modest enough for a funeral. Her high heels were Christian Louboutins with their signature red soles, and they made a sharp, clicking sound on the marble floor that felt utterly profane in the quiet, sacred space. As I watched her walk up the aisle with my best friend's husband, a feeling of pure ice spread through my veins. Behind me, I heard Rachel's mother let out a sound I will never forget. Betty Johnson was 61, a petite woman worn down by life's struggles. She had worked for 30 years at a truck stop diner in rural Tennessee, taking extra shifts just to give her daughter a chance at a better life. She had driven for 14 hours without stopping to get to this funeral, likely in the same old Honda she'd had since Rachel was a teenager. She had already buried her mother and her husband, and now she was burying her only child. Yet through every tragedy, she carried herself with a quiet grace that was truly inspiring. But seeing her son-in-law stroll into his wife's funeral with his mistress was the final blow that shattered Betty Johnson's composure. She made a noise, like a whimpering, wounded creature, a cry of raw pain that sliced through the hushed whispers, and then her legs gave out. I managed to catch her just before she collapsed, holding her small, trembling body. I held her as she sobbed uncontrollably, and in that moment, I realized something profound. When people show you their true colors in their darkest hour, a time when simple, human decency should matter most, you have to believe them. This wasn't Marcus being cruel because of grief. It wasn't confusion or a strange way of seeking comfort. This was Marcus Morrison finally letting his mask fall away, revealing the monster he had always been to everyone who had ever tried to see the good in him. I have seen people assess their awful nature under pressure before, but I had never witnessed anything like this. I had never seen someone do it in a $3,000 suit at his pregnant wife's funeral, with his lover on his arm and a faint smirk on his lips. Marcus led Jessica to the very front pew, to the seats reserved for immediate family, the place of honor right before the casket of the woman he swore to love for the rest of his life. He sat down and completely ignored Betty, not even sparing a glance for the woman who raised his late wife. Jessica sat beside him, elegantly crossing her ankles as if she were attending a high society event, her face a mask of neutrality, except for a slight, smug curve of her mouth. The whispers started instantly, spreading from pew to pew like a spark in a dry forest. I saw cell phones appear from purses and pockets, even though it was a funeral. People were openly recording, holding their phones up at angles they thought were discreet. By the time Marcus was seated, I was sure the whole disgraceful scene was already spreading all over the internet. The gossip was spreading like wildfire through social media, private messages, and hushed conversations, all while Rachel's body was lying in a coffin less than 20 feet away. The priest had stopped talking mid-sentence. He just stood there at the podium, looking completely lost, as his prepared words about everlasting peace and God's divine mercy suddenly seemed like a total joke. For a long, awkward moment, nobody seemed to know what to do next. The air in the church felt so heavy you could almost taste it, a foul mix of shock, anger, and something else that felt strangely like excitement. That is when the lawyer, Thomas Whitmore, got to his feet. I had only met Tom Whitmore once, just 3 days before, when he asked me to come to his office. He told me things about Rachel I never knew, things that made me wonder if I ever really knew my best friend at all. He made me realize she had been playing a game none of us even knew existed, and we were all about to see the final move. He was 58 years old and had that classic old money Connecticut charm, with silver hair brushed back from a high forehead and piercing blue eyes that seemed to notice everything but reveal nothing. For 30 years, he had been a top corporate lawyer before switching to estate planning. He carried the quiet confidence of a man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He walked to the front of the church with slow, deliberate steps, his face completely serious. The priest moved aside immediately, giving up the podium to this unexpected guest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore said, and his voice filled the church without any effort. There was a power in his tone that made people sit up taller, that silenced the whispering, and that even made Marcus glance up from his phone with the first flicker of worry I had seen on his face since he arrived. "Before we end this service," he announced, "I have been instructed by the deceased to read her final will. Right here, right now, in front of everyone she loved." He paused, letting his eyes scan the crowd before they settled on Marcus and Jessica in the front row. His next words were spoken softly, but they landed like a punch to the gut. "And everyone who betrayed her." Marcus's smug posture changed just slightly. Next to him, Jessica's perfectly painted nails dug into his arm, her knuckles turning white. Whitmore then reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, the official kind that lawyers use. He held it up for everyone to see before he slowly and carefully broke the wax seal. I didn't get it at the time. I had no idea what Rachel had been up to, what secret she was hiding, or what kind of empire she was secretly building, while everyone just saw her as a sweet elementary school teacher who made worksheets about butterflies. But as I stood in that church, watching the blood drain from Marcus Morrison's face, while attorney Whitmore got ready to read his dead wife's will, I started to figure it out. Rachel had known all along. She knew about the affair. She knew about the lies She knew about every single secret thing they had done behind her back. But she didn't just accept her fate or curl up and waste away like a helpless victim. She had a plan. I watched Marcus squirm in his seat as 200 people stared at him with open disgust, and I thought about what none of them knew, what even I hadn't known until 3 days ago. Rachel had spent the last months of her life carefully building a trap, and every person who ever hurt her, every person who ever underestimated her, and every person who looked at her sweet face and saw weakness had just walked right into it. To understand how we got to this point, with my best friend in a coffin and her husband's mistress sitting in the family section, like she owned the place, I have to take you back before the cheating, before the secrets, and before the dark and careful plans. We have to go back to the beginning of a love story that was destined to end with both a tragedy and a victory. Rachel Ann Johnson was raised in a trailer park on the edge of a small town in rural Tennessee. It was the kind of place that's not on any maps, the kind of place people are always trying to leave. Her mother, Betty, pulled double shifts at a truck stop diner. She would come home at 3 a.m. smelling of burnt coffee and fried food, her feet aching and her back sore, but she always had a warm smile ready for her daughter. There was no father around. Betty never spoke about him, and Rachel knew better than to ask. But Rachel had a brilliant mind, a sharp and fiery intelligence that her teachers noticed right away. It made her stand out from the other kids in her underfunded school district. It made the guidance counselors just shake their heads in amazement and say things like, "That girl could do anything if she just got a real chance." Betty Johnson was going to make sure her daughter got that chance. She took on extra shifts whenever she could. She started cleaning houses for rich families on the other side of town. She saved every single dollar that wasn't for food or rent, stuffing cash into old coffee cans, under her mattress, and into a bank account that she never, ever touched. When Rachel turned 17, she earned a full scholarship to the University of Virginia. She burst into tears when she opened the letter. Betty cried too, standing right there in their small trailer, holding her daughter's future in her hands. All those years of sacrifice had finally paid off. Rachel showed up at college with just 2 suitcases, $300 in her pocket, and a fierce determination to succeed. She juggled 3 different jobs while she was at the university. She worked as a waitress at a diner near campus, serving privileged college kids who barely tipped and old-timers who treated her like she was invisible. She tutored students who were failing economics and business, subjects she had taught herself using library books and free online classes. On weekends, she cleaned dorm rooms, scrubbing toilets, and changing bed sheets for people who would never even bother to learn her name. Despite all of that, she kept a perfect 4.0 grade point average. She was on the dean's list every single semester. She graduated with honors and had earned the respect of every professor she ever had. It was there that she met Marcus Morrison. He was the opposite of Rachel in every way. He was wealthy, she was poor. He was well-connected. She was an outsider. He had the kind of deep confidence that only people who have never had a real struggle can have. His family's wealth went back for generations. It was old Connecticut money, built from smart investments, large inheritances, and the kind of deals that get made at country clubs and on yachts. Marcus was failing his economics class, and Rachel was assigned to be his tutor. He arrived 20 minutes late for their first meeting. He was wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than Rachel's entire collection of clothes, and he looked at her as if she were there to serve him. She should have just left right then and there. Looking back now, knowing the whole story, I can see all the red flags that Rachel either missed or simply chose to ignore. The casual arrogance, the way he acted like his time was more important than hers, the way he glanced at her laptop, her clothes, and her shoes. You could almost see him adding up her net worth in his head and deciding she wasn't good enough. But Marcus Morrison didn't get to where he was by being stupid. He knew how to read people. He saw something in Rachel that day. Maybe he was impressed by her intelligence, or maybe he was drawn to her beauty, a natural kind of pretty that didn't need expensive clothes or makeup to be noticed. Or perhaps it was something much darker. Maybe he saw a woman who had fought for everything her whole life and assumed she would be grateful for any little piece of attention he decided to give her. So he changed his approach. He started showing up on time for their sessions. He would bring her coffee, and he even remembered exactly how she liked it. He began asking about her life, her family, and what she hoped for in the future, and he seemed to listen with real interest. He pursued her with a passion. He would show up at the diner where she worked and order coffee he never drank just so he could watch her as she moved from table to table. He sent enormous bouquets of flowers to her small apartment, the kind that must have cost a fortune. He wrote her little notes that were surprisingly thoughtful for a guy, a man who had everything handed to him and never worked a day in his life. Rachel was hesitant at the beginning. She was not a fool. She understood they were from completely different social circles, and she was certain his family would never approve of the daughter of a waitress. She knew that storybook romances were just for kids, and that people who had to stress about rent did not get happy endings. But Marcus was persistent, he was charming, and he was incredibly skilled at telling her exactly what she wanted to hear. "I am not like them," he promised her one evening, after she finally confessed why she had been keeping him at a distance. "Those wealthy kids who act superior to everyone else, that is not me, Rachel. I love you for the person you are, not for where you came from. Your background means nothing to me." And she fell for it. Heaven help her, she actually believed him. They were married 5 years later at his family's exclusive country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. I served as her maid of honor, standing next to my dearest friend in a dress I had found on a sale rack and altered with my own 2 hands. I watched her face light up with a kind of happiness that made my own heart ache with joy for her. Did you know that Rachel made her own wedding dress? She came up with the design and sewed every stitch by hand over a period of 6 months. This was because Diana Moore Warrior Morrison, Marcus's mother, refused to spend a dime on a gown for someone she referred to as the help. "A girl from a trailer park does not wear Vera Wang," Diana had remarked, unaware that I was just around the corner and heard every single toxic word. No matter how you dress it up, trash is always just trash. I should have told Rachel what I heard. I have replayed that exact moment in my head a million times, questioning if things might have turned out differently if I had only spoken up and told her the truth. But she looked so incredibly happy that day, standing at the altar in her handmade gown with flowers woven into her hair, exchanging vows with a man she loved with every piece of her heart. I just could not bring myself to ruin that for her. Perhaps that makes me a coward. Perhaps it makes me an accessory to all the misery that came after. I have had a long time to think about it, and I am still not sure what the right answer is. The wedding reception was a perfect mix of wonderful and awful. It was wonderful because Rachel was absolutely glowing. The location was breathtaking, and for a short while, it felt like love could truly overcome the vast divide between 2 people from different worlds. It was terrible because I saw Diana Morrison move through the room, spreading her poison to anyone who would listen, ensuring that everyone knew her true feelings about her new daughter-in-law. "Just give it 5 years," I overheard Diana tell a woman dripping with diamonds, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "You can take the girl out of the trailer park, but you cannot take the trailer park out of the girl. The excitement will fade, and Marcus will go back to the values he was raised with." 5 years was Diana's guess. She was wrong by 3. The initial 2 years of their marriage seemed happy, at least from the outside. Rachel and Marcus settled into a gorgeous apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He began a career at a top-tier investment bank. She took a position teaching 3rd grade at a private city school, shaping young minds and coming home with delightful stories about her students that made her entire face light up. Then, Rachel found out about Marcus's gambling addiction. He had blown $50,000 at an Atlantic City casino. That was $50,000 in a single weekend, money they couldn't afford. It was money he had charged to their shared credit cards and secured with a loan in both of their names without her knowledge. He broke down in tears when she confronted him about it. They seemed like genuine tears, at least. He dropped to his knees in their living room, pleading for her to forgive him. He swore it was a one-off mistake and promised it would never happen again. He said all the typical things people say when they are caught, feeling desperate and not quite ready to face their problems. Rachel used her entire inheritance to clear his debts. Her grandmother had spent 50 years working as a housekeeper, cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors for rich families who likely never even bothered to learn her name. When she passed away, she left Rachel $50,000. It was every single cent she had managed to save over a lifetime of difficult work. Rachel gave all of it to Marcus without a second thought, without any bitterness, because she was in love with him. She believed in their marriage and thought it was what a good wife was supposed to do. I told her she was out of her mind. We were at my apartment in Queens, drinking wine from coffee mugs, since I had recently broken all my actual wine glasses. I looked directly into her eyes and told her something I remember word for word. I said, "Girl, the only wager you should be making is on whether he will remember your anniversary. You should not be betting with your retirement savings, your grandmother's entire life's work, or your whole financial future." She just laughed and told me I was too much of a worrier. She insisted that Marcus had learned his lesson. She explained that every marriage goes through difficult periods, and this was just one of theirs. I truly wanted to believe she was right. I really did. It was around that time that Rachel started what she casually called a small hobby. She had developed some unique teaching materials for her own classroom, including lesson plans, worksheets, and activities that her students adored. A coworker suggested she should try selling them online through a platform for educators and later on a site called Etsy. "It is just for fun," Rachel explained, "a way to earn some extra cash, maybe for a vacation one day." Marcus was completely dismissive of the idea. He came home one afternoon while Rachel was on her laptop, creating a lesson plan about butterflies and their life cycles. He peered over her shoulder with a condescending smile that made my blood boil when Rachel described it to me later. "That is really cute, honey," he said. "You should stick to the teaching part and let me handle the business matters." Rachel just smiled, nodded, and continued with her work. But I knew my best friend. I thought I knew her better than anyone on the planet. And as she told me that story, I noticed a flicker in her eyes I had never seen before. It was not hurt feelings, disappointment, or even acceptance. It was something sharper, colder, and it almost looked like she was calculating something. Looking back on it now, I believe that was the exact moment when everything shifted. It was the moment the naive girl from Tennessee who believed in happy endings began to transform into someone completely different. She became someone patient, someone strategic, and someone dangerous. But I did not see it at the time. I could not see what was truly happening behind my best friend's sweet smile and gentle personality. I thought she was just coping with a bad situation. I figured she was adjusting to her new life. I believed she was doing what countless women have done for ages when they feel stuck in unhappy marriages with no obvious escape. I had absolutely no clue that she was in the process of building an empire. 6 months before the funeral, Rachel was 6 months pregnant and looked more stunning than I had ever seen her. Pregnancy agreed with her in a way that defied all the terrible stories other women share about swollen feet, morning sickness, and unpredictable skin. She was glowing, with a beautiful softness to her, and she constantly had one hand resting on her belly, as if she were protecting something incredibly precious. And of course she was. We arranged to have lunch on a Thursday in early spring at a small cafe in Brooklyn, the kind of place that sells expensive avocado toast that social media influencers pretend to enjoy. Rachel was already seated when I got there, at a table near the window, with the sunlight pouring over her face. She looked like a classic painting of a blissful mother-to-be. But something was not right. I noticed it as soon as I sat down. There was a certain tension around her eyes that her smile could not completely conceal, a tightness in her posture that suggested sleepless nights and hard choices. "Just tell me," I said, skipping the usual small talk. We were too close for that. Rachel took a long breath, then reached into her handbag and took out a credit card bill. "I discovered this last week," she said. "Look at the transactions, the third one from the bottom." I examined the statement. It showed a charge from a jewelry store, Tiffany & Company, for $4,300. "He bought me some jewelry," Rachel said, her tone completely flat. "The problem is, he never gave me any jewelry. There was no necklace, no earrings, no bracelet, nothing at all." "Maybe it is a surprise," I suggested, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how unconvincing they sounded. "Perhaps he is holding on to it for a special day." Rachel just shook her head. "I have searched our closet, his dresser drawers, and his home office. There is no hidden jewelry box anywhere, no receipt for a future pickup. Absolutely nothing. So where did $4,000 worth of jewelry from Tiffany go?" Rachel's eyes met mine, and what I saw in them made my stomach clench. It was not shock, confusion, or even anger. It was acceptance. It was as if she had already figured out the answer and was simply waiting for the proof to confirm her suspicions. "That is what I have to find out," she declared. She did not confront Marcus immediately. As I would learn, that was not Rachel's way of handling things. She had spent too many years observing her mother handle tough situations with intelligence and planning. She had learned long ago that knowledge was the ultimate advantage, and that the person who reacts first is not necessarily the person who comes out on top. Instead, she hired a private detective. His name was Mike Callahan, a former New York Police Department detective who specialized in what he tactfully referred to as domestic investigations. Rachel paid him using the money from her online teaching materials business, which she mentioned was doing quite well. At that moment, I did not give that comment a second thought. Quite well could mean almost anything, like a couple of $100 a month, just enough to pay the investigator's fee without touching the joint bank accounts that Marcus watched like a hawk. I was about to find out what pretty well really meant. The photos arrived less than a week later. Rachel phoned me on a Wednesday night, her voice having that particular calm that told me she was holding herself together with every ounce of her strength. She asked if I could come to her place. Marcus had a late night at work, and she needed me to see something. I rode the train up to her apartment on the Upper East Side, the one I had always secretly admired for its beautiful high ceilings and elegant crown moldings. Rachel answered the door with swollen red eyes. Holding a manila envelope against her chest, as if it were filled with something lethal. It was. With shaking hands, she laid the pictures out on her dining room table. There was Marcus, with a blonde woman, their heads leaning in close at a restaurant in Tribeca. His hand was resting on top of hers on the clean white tablecloth. Then there was Marcus, with that same woman, walking into the lobby of a high-end hotel in Soho, their arms wrapped around one another. Another photo showed Marcus and the woman on a sandy beach, which the location tag identified as Martha's Vineyard. They were strolling hand in hand at the edge of the water, looking like a couple on their honeymoon. The woman's name was Jessica Crane. She was 28 years old and a junior associate at the investment firm where Marcus worked. She had 87,000 Instagram followers who saw carefully staged photos of a luxurious lifestyle that I now understood was being paid for by my best friend's husband. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, not entirely sure. I wanted to hear her answer. "The private investigator believes it's been at least 8 months," Rachel replied. "Maybe even longer. It started before I was pregnant. It might have even started before I knew I was going to have a baby." We just sat there in silence for a while, the photographs scattered between us like pieces of evidence at a crime scene. In a way, that is exactly what they were. "So what are you going to do?" I asked. Rachel's expression hardened. "I'm going to take my time and think. I'm going to make a plan. And then, when I finally make my move, I'm going to be prepared for anything that happens." She waited an entire week before she confronted Marcus. She spent that time getting ready, but I had no idea back then just how much she was preparing or what she was preparing for. The moment she finally brought up his affair, they were in the kitchen of their gorgeous apartment. Rachel was completely composed and in control. She held the photos in her hand and asked him a very simple question. "How long has this been happening?" Marcus made no attempt to deny it. He offered no apology. He didn't drop to his knees to beg for her forgiveness, like he did when she found out about his gambling addiction. This time, he went on the attack. "You've been so dull ever since you got pregnant," he sneered, and every single word felt like a physical blow. "The only things you ever talk about are the baby, what color to paint the nursery, and which pediatricians to choose. All I hear about is which stroller we should get. It is just draining, Rachel. When I get home from work, I want to be with someone who can hold a real conversation about something besides the symptoms of pregnancy." Rachel just stood there, 6 months along, with one hand instinctively resting on her stomach, taking in every cruel word. "Jessica gets the kind of pressure I'm dealing with," Marcus went on. "She actually values what I do for a living. She doesn't complain about me coming home late for dinner or putting in too many hours at the office. She is encouraging. She is fun. She is everything you were before you turned into this incubator. An incubator." He had just called his pregnant wife an incubator, as casually as someone might talk about the weather. But Marcus was not done. It was as if years of cruelty had been bottled up inside him, held in check by the thinnest layer of decency he still had. Now all of that poison was spilling out of him. And what exactly are you going to do about it anyway? Are you going to leave me? On what money? You don't have a thing, Rachel. Not a single thing without me. Your salary as a teacher wouldn't even cover the rent for a tiny studio in this city. And your little side business, selling lesson plans, give me a break. That is a hobby, not a real source of income. He moved toward her, towering over her and using his size to intimidate her. Your mother was nothing but a waitress at some roadside diner. And you're no different. You're a nobody, a complete charity case. I was the one who pulled you out of that trailer park and gave you a life that you never could have had on your own. Every single thing you own, everything you've become, you owe it all to me." His voice lowered into a whisper that felt far more menacing than a shout would have. "If you even think about divorcing me, I will completely ruin you. I will get this apartment, I will get our bank accounts, and I will get the baby. My family has the most powerful lawyers in all of New York. Lawyers who have been working for the Morrison family since before you were even born. Your family has absolutely nothing. No money, no influence, and no power. You would waste years of your life fighting me in court, and when it was all over, you would have nothing left. You'll end up exactly where you began, with no money, all alone, living in some dumpy apartment, and only seeing our daughter on weekends if you get lucky. Is that really what you want? Is that the kind of life you want for our child?" Rachel said nothing. She couldn't speak. Her voice was gone, completely silenced by the sheer scale of his cruelty, and by the sudden chilling realization that the man she had married, the man she had loved and made sacrifices for and trusted, had never really been real at all. He left to spend the evening with Jessica, and she drove to a parking garage on Fifth Avenue. She just sat there in her car for 2 hours, crying until there were no tears left to cry, until her eyes were puffy and her throat was completely raw. Her hands had started to cramp from how tightly she was gripping the steering wheel. She called me from inside that garage, and she was sobbing so uncontrollably that I could hardly make out what she was saying. I wanted to drive straight into Manhattan that very second, just to hold her and tell her that it would all be all right, but she refused to let me come. She told me she had to think. She said she had to decide on her next move. I learned a valuable lesson that day, something that has always stuck with me. When a man tells you that you are nothing without him, he isn't making a threat. He is making a confession. He is telling you his single greatest fear, the one thing that keeps him up at night, the one truth he can't stand to admit. He is absolutely petrified that you might discover that he is the one who is nothing without you. He's scared that his power, his money, and all his connections are meaningless if you choose to leave him. He is terrified that he has built his entire identity on making you feel small, and if you ever dared to stand up to your full potential, everyone would see him for the weak, insecure little man he truly is. After those 2 hours in the parking garage, Rachel dried her eyes. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number I had never seen before. "Tom," she said, her voice now completely steady, with an icy tone that sent a shiver down my spine when she told me about it later. "It is Rachel. I believe the time has come. Set everything into motion." That was the moment I finally learned the truth about my best friend, a secret she had been keeping for 6 years. She had been quietly building something amazing, while the rest of us only saw a kind teacher who sold worksheets with butterflies on them. Her business selling teaching materials was not just a hobby. It wasn't something that just paid for a vacation once in a while, or a fancy meal out. It was a $47 million corporation called Edu Spark Digital, and it was the biggest independent platform for teacher resources in the entire United States. It had hundreds of thousands of people subscribed to it, had deals with school districts all over the country, and had multiple sources of income from subscriptions, licensing agreements, and corporate training seminars. Rachel had created the entire thing on her own, bit by bit, by waking up early and staying up late, all while Marcus assumed she was just grading homework or preparing her lessons. She had officially formed the company in Delaware long before they got married, and she had placed everything into a special kind of trust that her husband could never get his hands on. She had hired a staff, closed major deals, and made smart choices that transformed her small hobby into a massive success. And Marcus knew nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. He believed she was earning a couple $100s a month from selling her worksheets. He believed she was completely dependent on him, He believed he was the one with all the power in their marriage. He was convinced he could bully her with threats of poverty and custody fights, certain that she had no other option but to do as he said. He was about to find out just how mistaken he was. 3 days after her argument with Marcus, Rachel had a meeting with her lawyer, Thomas Whitmore. They met at a little cafe in Brooklyn that she picked for one specific reason. No one from their high society circle on the Upper East Side would ever be seen there. I was there with her because she insisted on it. She told me she needed someone to be a witness, a person she could completely trust to confirm that every action she was about to take was perfectly legal, properly recorded, and beyond any doubt. Tom Whitmore had been friends with Rachel's mother for many years. He had handled a case at Betty's Diner a long time ago, back when he was a new prosecutor getting his start with small-town crimes. Betty had kept him supplied with coffee and pie and had listened to him vent about his long workdays and the difficult people he had to deal with. The two of them had struck up an unexpected friendship that had continued ever since. So when Rachel first needed legal help with starting her business, she had reached out to Tom. When she needed assistance in setting up her company to shield it from a husband she was already starting to distrust, she reached out to Tom. And when she finally understood that her marriage was a complete sham and that she had to protect herself and her unborn child, she reached out to Tom. He laid out all the paperwork on the cafe table with the smooth confidence of a man who had been through this process countless times. Still, I could notice a definite spark of pride in his eyes as he went over what Rachel had created. The entire company is secured in an irrevocable trust, he explained, his voice low, even though we were in a private booth. It was created before you were married, and it was started using only money that you earned on your own. Marcus has absolutely no legal right to any of it. He has no way to get to it, no way to break it, and he doesn't even have the right to know it exists, unless you decide to tell him. Tom tapped a second document. This file contains a full record of his behavior, his gambling debts, his financial schemes, and proof of the affair, complete with dates, places, and pictures. It details every single lie he told you, every promise he shattered, and every time he dipped into your joint accounts without you knowing or agreeing to it. I just stared at the mountain of paper, at the unbelievable amount of evidence my best friend had put together without anyone having a clue. How long have you been collecting all this? 6 years, Rachel answered calmly. It started the very first time I found out he was gambling. I knew right then that something was deeply wrong, even though I did not want to face it. So I began to keep a record, just in case, just in case. She had been married for 8 years. For 6 of those years, she had been quietly and systematically gathering evidence against her own husband. She was preparing for a day she prayed would never arrive, but she was far too intelligent not to be ready for it. What do we do now? I asked. For now, we wait, Tom said. We need Rachel to deliver the baby safely. The child's future must be secured before we make a single move, and we have to be certain that when we do finally act, Marcus has nowhere to run, no hidden money, no legal tricks, and absolutely no way to flip this back on Rachel. Rachel nodded, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. And I found something else, she said, something that changes the entire game. Then she told us about his plan for Costa Rica. Marcus was getting ready to drain their joint accounts right after the baby was born. He had already purchased plane tickets for himself and for Jessica. His plan was to grab every dollar he could and vanish to a country that does not extradite, leaving Rachel with a newborn baby and a crushing amount of debt. He has been moving money in small amounts for months, Rachel explained, just enough to not set off any bank alerts. The only reason I caught him is because I have been watching our finances like a hawk. A smile crossed her face, but it was not a sweet smile. It was the grin of a chess master who just saw her opponent walk straight into a checkmate. "He has no idea that I know," she said. "He does not have a clue that I have been 10 steps ahead of him for years. He thinks I am naive. He thinks I am weak. He thinks I am out of options. And that is going to be the biggest mistake of his life." I remember walking out of that cafe with my stomach in knots. I felt so proud of my friend, who had shown more courage and strategic genius than anyone I knew. But I was also terrified of the storm that was coming, of the war that was about to begin. And I felt something else too, something I could not put a name on back then. Maybe it was the shock of realizing that the woman I thought I knew, my sweet Rachel, the one who cried during sad commercials, adopted stray cats, and created lesson plans about butterflies, had been secretly building a $47 million empire while her husband believed she was just playing house. "Document everything," she told me as we walked toward the subway. That was her final piece of advice, the wisdom she had earned from 6 years of surviving a marriage to a man who would have ruined her if he got the chance. Take screenshots, make recordings, save bank statements. When you are up against someone who have more power than you, information is your only weapon. Build a file, Claire. You have no idea when you might need it. I thought it was solid advice at the time, the kind of thing you hear and agree with, then tuck away in your mind, never thinking you will actually have to use it. I had no idea how quickly those words would become my own lifeline. The weeks that followed were filled with tension, but also with hope. Rachel played her role flawlessly. She was the devoted, pregnant wife who did not suspect a thing. She worried over colors for the nursery and debated baby names, all while her husband continued his affair with more and more arrogance. She would smile when Marcus got home late, smelling like Jessica's perfume. She would nod along when he called his weekends away, a work emergency. She just waited and watched and wrote down everything. One afternoon, she called me, her voice buzzing with excitement. I found his whole escape plan, every part of it. The bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, the plane tickets to Costa Rica, even the fake passport he had made for himself. A fake passport. It seems he has been planning this for a lot longer than I even thought. He has an entire second identity created, all set to go the second things get messy here. She let out a laugh, and it was the sound of pure victory. He has no clue that I have copies of every single thing. He believes his secret little email account is safe because he chose a password he thought I would never figure out. He does not know I put a keylogger on his laptop 3 years ago. "Oh my God, Rachel." "I know," she said, sounding almost giddy with triumph. "I know it sounds extreme, but you have to get it, Claire. I have lived with this man for 8 years. I know exactly what he is capable of doing, and I knew from the very start that if things ever went south, I would need to have my own insurance policy." "What are you going to do with it all?" I asked. "Nothing for now. I am going to wait until Hope is born. I will wait until she is safe and healthy and legally protected. And then I am going to burn his entire world to the ground." It was the first time she had ever told me the baby's name. Hope. She was naming her little girl Hope. And in that moment, no matter what, I truly believed that everything was going to be all right. I thought Rachel had planned for every possibility, that she was going to come out on top. I should have known better. I should have remembered that life never follows a script, that even the most perfect plans can fall apart when faced with something nobody could have seen coming. But I did not know what was on the horizon. None of us did. 3 terrible things happened in just 2 weeks, one right after the other, like a line of dominoes set up by a cruel twist of fate. Each one was a disaster by itself, but together, they almost destroyed everything Rachel had spent years building. The first disaster hit without any warning. Rachel was at Jefferson Elementary School. She was standing in front of a room full of parents for a normal conference about their children's reading skills. She was right in the middle of explaining how much one struggling student had improved when she felt a sudden, sharp pain shoot through her belly. It was followed by a rush of warmth down her legs. She glanced down and saw blood pooling on the floor. The next few hours were a complete blur of ambulance sirens, hospital hallways, and doctors talking in serious, urgent voices. They had to perform an emergency cesarean section at only 32 weeks. The baby was coming far too early. The placenta had detached from the uterus. They had to operate that instant, or they would lose them both. Hope Morrison was born at 4:15 in the afternoon on a rainy Thursday in September. She was 4 pounds and 2 ounces of pure fighting spirit, and she was immediately rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit. There, a network of tubes and monitors would keep her alive while her tiny body struggled to learn what it had not been given enough time to prepare for. Rachel barely survived the surgery. She lost a terrifying amount of blood, and her blood pressure plummeted so low that the doctors were not sure she would survive the night. But she did, because Rachel was never a quitter. She had way too much to fight for to ever give up. She woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, as weak as a newborn kitten. Her entire body felt like one giant bruise of pain and exhaustion. The very first thing she asked about was hope. The very next thing she asked for was her phone. She could not put her plan into action from a hospital bed. She could not meet with Tom Whitmore, or keep an eye on Marcus's accounts, or get the legal papers ready that would protect her daughter. Every single day she spent recovering was another day that Marcus might find out what she had been building. It was another day he might find a way to twist the situation. Another day he might escape to Costa Rica before she had a chance to stop him. I went to see her every day. I brought her magazines she never read and smoothies she could barely sip. I watched her get more and more stressed as her own body refused to follow her timeline. She was supposed to be in control right now. She was supposed to be strong. Instead, she was stuck in a hospital bed, relying on doctors and nurses and a husband who barely visited and never stayed for long. The first disaster was losing time, strength, and any sense of control. The second one showed up 3 days later, and it was a visitor Rachel never expected. Diana Morrison walked into the hospital room carrying a bouquet of flowers and a cashmere blanket for the baby. She was dressed in that casual, expensive way that likely cost more than my entire monthly paycheck. She gave Rachel a kiss on the cheek with lips that had never known real warmth, and then sat down in the chair by the bed as if she planned to be there for a while. "I came to help," Diana said, her voice as sweet as poison. "Marcus is just so busy, and you need someone to look after you while you heal. We are family, after all." Rachel was too worn out to argue, too exhausted to see the quick, hungry way Diana's eyes darted to her phone on the nightstand, and then to her laptop in the bag near the window. She was too medicated to recognize the wolf hiding in plain sight. I went to the hospital that afternoon to see Rachel, bringing a bag of her favorite cookies and a new book. I quietly opened the door to her room, thinking I would find her resting alone or with a nurse. Instead, I saw Diana Morrison leaning over Rachel's bedside table. She held Rachel's phone in her hands, her eyes glued to the screen as she scrolled through something with intense focus. Rachel was sound asleep. The medical machines beside her bed beeped in a steady rhythm, delivering the medicine that kept her comfortable while her body mended. She had no idea what was taking place just 3 feet away from her. "Diana," I said. My voice was sharp enough to cut through the quiet room. She snapped her head up, and for a split second, I saw something unguarded in her eyes, a look of pure victory, like a hunter who had finally trapped its quarry. Then just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a friendly smile so innocent it would have fooled anyone not paying close attention. Claire, my dear, I was just making sure Rachel hadn't missed any important messages. You know how she gets about that little business of hers. Diana placed the phone back on the table and calmly gathered her belongings. I have to get going, but I will be back tomorrow. Please make sure she rests. She glided out of the room as if she had done nothing wrong at all, leaving behind the faint smell of expensive perfume and a cold, heavy feeling in my stomach that told me something awful had just occurred. The second Diana was out the door, I snatched Rachel's phone. I didn't know her passcode, but the lock screen showed the recently used apps, email, notes, and documents, all opened within the past hour. I gently woke Rachel and explained what I had seen. As I spoke, the color drained from her face. Her hands shook when she took the phone from me and looked at her history, confirming every app Diana had opened. There were emails about her divorce, text messages to Tom Whitmore, and documents that mentioned Edu Spark and its $47 million value. She knows, Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. She knows everything. That night, Diana called Marcus. We only figured out what she said to him later, when all the terrible pieces started to fit together. She told him about Rachel's secret company, about the divorce she was planning, and about the evidence Rachel had been collecting against him. She told him every single thing. The next morning, Marcus Morrison arrived at the hospital like a hurricane hitting the coast. He burst into Rachel's room just as she was attempting to breastfeed Hope for the first time. Her body was still weak, her mind was still hazy from the pain medicine. The baby wasn't latching, and Rachel had started to cry out of pure frustration. And then her husband was there, standing over her bed, his eyes filled with rage. "You think you can just leave me?" His voice was a low, venomous hiss, quiet enough not to alert the nurses in the hallway, but sharp enough to wound. "You think your little website for teachers is going to scare me? I know all about it now, Rachel. My mother told me everything." He leaned in closer, so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I will ruin you in court. I will take Hope. My mother will testify that you are mentally unstable, that the pregnancy messed with your head, that you are an unfit mother. You will never see your daughter again." Hospital security escorted him out 10 minutes later after a nurse heard Rachel sobbing and came to check on her. But the harm was already done. All of her careful plans, all of her hard work to ensure a quiet victory were destroyed by her mother-in-law's spying and her husband's fury. She cried for hours after he was gone. She just held Hope and cried until she had no tears left. She cried until her eyes were swollen shut and her voice was gone, until the monitors next to her bed began to sound an alarm. That was the second disaster, the loss of her secrets, her advantage, her element of surprise. The third catastrophe was the worst one of all. In the days that followed, Rachel's health took a terrifying turn. The doctors said it was an infection, but they seemed confused by how aggressive it was. They gave her powerful antibiotics, but nothing seemed to work. Her fever shot up, and her organs began to show signs of distress. Her recovery, which should have been a straight path forward, went into a full reverse. I started to notice something strange during Diana's visits. She came every single day, acting deeply concerned and bringing a special herbal tea from Connecticut that she claimed would speed up Rachel's healing. "It is an old family recipe," Diana would say as she pushed a warm cup into Rachel's shaky hands. "My grandmother swore by it. My mother used it. It has healing abilities you just can't get from a pharmacy." Rachel drank it mostly to be polite, to keep the peace and to avoid another fight when she was too weak to stand up for herself. On the night after Diana's third visit with the tea, Rachel's heart monitor started to blare. A voice came over the hospital speaker system, code blue. Crash cart to room 417. I was in the waiting room when it happened, sleeping in one of those awful chairs because I hadn't left the hospital in 3 days. I heard the announcement and my heart sank. I just knew it was for Rachel. I raced to her room and pressed my face to the window, watching in horror as a team of doctors and nurses rushed to her bedside. Her heart had stopped, her organs were shutting down. She was dying right there in front of me, and all I could do was stand there and pray. I prayed to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. They managed to bring her back twice. After the second time, they weren't sure she would pull through, but she did. She always did. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, I was sitting right beside her, holding her hand so tightly it was as if I could keep her connected to the world by my will alone. She looked at me with a startling clarity that cut through all the drugs and the pain, and she said 3 words that changed absolutely everything. Diana is poisoning me. Rachel, I began, ready to brush it off as paranoia or the fever talking, as anything but the truth my own gut was screaming. I saved the cup. Rachel's voice was faint but firm. The last cup of tea she gave me. It is in the drawer of the bedside table. Get it tested, Claire, and get samples of my blood and my hair from the hospital. Make sure the chain of custody is documented. She grabbed my wrist, and her grip was surprisingly strong. I am not going to survive this. I can feel it, Claire. Whatever she is giving me, it is taking over. But I am not going to let them win. Not Diana, and not Marcus. None of them. She made me promise that day. She made me promise to show everyone the video she had recorded, to make sure the world was watching when the truth finally came out. She made me promise to protect Hope, no matter what. I made those promises, and I meant every single one. I just had no idea what it would cost me to keep them. Rachel was moved to a hospice facility on a rainy Tuesday morning, just 3 weeks after Hope was born. The infection had spread everywhere, defeating every antibiotic the doctors threw at it. Her organs were failing in slow motion, shutting down one by one, like someone turning off the lights in a house after a party is over. The doctors were completely stumped and frustrated. A healthy 32-year-old woman should not get sick this fast, they kept saying. There has to be something we are not seeing. But I knew exactly what they were missing. I had already sent the teacup to a private lab for analysis, paying for it with money from a secret account Rachel had set up for emergencies. It would take time to get the results back, time that Rachel no longer had, but I knew deep down what the report would say. Diana Morrison had been poisoning her own daughter-in-law, slowly and carefully, with the kind of patience that suggested she had been planning this for a very long time. Detective Sarah Brennan found me in the hospital cafeteria the day before Rachel was moved to hospice. She was a tough-looking woman, 45 years old, with 20 years on the police force. She had the kind of tired face and sharp eyes that come from seeing the worst of people and still finding a way to get up in the morning. I knew her mother, Brennan said, as she sat down across from me with a cup of coffee that looked like it had been burning on the pot all day. Betty Johnson worked a case at her diner years ago, back when I was a rookie cop who still thought she could save the entire world. She was the sweetest woman I had ever met. Her daughter was too, from what I can recall. The detective took a sip of the awful coffee and looked me straight in the eye. Something about this is not right. Healthy new mothers do not just fall apart like this. The medical team here is baffled, and that usually means they are not looking for something because they are afraid of what they might find. What are you trying to say? I am saying that I am looking into this. quietly and off the record for now, at least until I have something solid to go on. But if you know anything at all that could explain why a perfectly healthy young woman is dying in that hospital bed upstairs, this is your moment to tell me. I explained everything about the teacup, Diana's frequent visits with her herbal tea, and Rachel's certainty that her mother-in-law was poisoning her. Brennan listened intently, her expression turning more severe with every word I spoke. "Get me the lab report," she commanded when I was done, "and any other documentation Rachel kept. If this is what I suspect, we will need every single piece of evidence we can find." Rachel spent her final days in a hospice room that had a window looking out onto a garden she was too frail to walk in. The late afternoon sun poured through the glass, casting a golden glow on everything. The machines by her bed emitted soft, rhythmic beeps, counting down the time she had left. I sat by her side every day, holding her hand while we talked about everything and nothing at all. There were moments when she was completely clear, as sharp as she had always been, even with all the medication and her failing body. Other times, she would drift away, murmuring about things like butterflies, lesson plans, and a little girl named Hope she would never get to see grow up. During her last fully lucid day, she had me make the promise one more time. I wrote letters, she said, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. I wrote them for Hope, one for every birthday until she turns 18, for her first day of school, her first heartbreak, her graduation, and even her wedding day. Tears streamed down my face. "Rachel," I began, but she gripped my hand with a strength that surprised me. "Let me finish. I wrote letters for every moment, everything I am going to miss, all the things I wanted to say to her. My words will be there for her, even when I can't be." She drew a shaky breath, and I wrote other letters, too, for Marcus, for Jessica, and for Diana. A very different kind of letter. The type of letter they won't be able to just brush aside, deny, or act like they never received. A faint smile touched her lips then. It was weak and filled with sadness, but it was also fierce. The Rachel I knew. They think I'm dying powerless and broken. They believe they have won, that they have gotten away with it all. They think the girl from the trailer park finally got what she had coming to her. They have no idea what is about to happen, Claire. Absolutely no idea. I spent 6 years building a $47 million empire, while my husband assumed I was just making worksheets about butterflies and the life cycle of frogs. I beat him in every aspect of our lives, and he never even realized we were competing. If that does not make me good wife material, I do not know what does. She let out a soft laugh that turned into a cough, her entire body trembling from the effort. "Promise me you will show them the video. Promise me that everyone will be there to see it, especially Diana, especially Marcus, and especially his little Instagram princess." "I promise," I said, and I felt that promise in every part of my soul. "Promise me you will look after Hope. Raise her to be a strong woman and tell her about me, the real me, not the victim they are going to try and paint me as. Tell her that I fought for her until my very last breath. I promise. Promise me that you will complete what I started. You will find a folder in Tom Whitmore's office. It is marked Phase 2. If Marcus ever makes a threat against Hope, if he ever attempts to take what is rightfully hers, you are to open that folder and you will burn his entire world to the ground. I promise, Rachel. I promise you all of it." She passed away at 3:47 in the morning, on a cold Tuesday in October. I was the only person with her, holding her hand as the monitors went silent and the room became still. Nurses came in and out. The hospice chaplain spoke words that I did not really hear. Outside, the rain that had been pouring all day finally let up, and the very first signs of dawn started to brighten the dark sky. Her final words were a whisper, so quiet that I almost did not hear them. "Make them watch, Claire. Every single one of them." "I will," I told her, even though she was already gone. "I fully intend to." The lawyer, Thomas Whitmore, stood at the podium in St. Andrew's Church, holding an envelope in his weathered hands. The 200 people gathered there held their breath, all waiting to discover what Rachel Morrison had left behind. Marcus was in the front row with Jessica next to him, looking more irritated than worried. He thought this would be a simple procedure. Just a quick reading of a basic will that would leave everything to him, the grieving husband. He had no clue what was about to unfold. "I, Rachel Ann Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament." Mr. Whitmore's voice was strong and clear, reaching every corner of the large church. He read the introduction slowly, deliberately building the suspense, in a way that made even me want to yell at him to hurry up. And then he got to the first major revelation, and the atmosphere in the room completely changed. "To my daughter, Hope Elizabeth Morrison, I leave all of my shares in EduSpark Digital, a company that I founded and built myself from absolutely nothing over the last 6 years. These shares are to be held in a secure trust, which will be managed by my friend and sole trustee, Claire Bennett, until Hope turns 25 years old." He stopped for a moment, allowing the information to sink in. "At the time of my passing, EduSpark Digital was valued at $47 million. Current financial projections indicate the company's value will exceed $80 million within 2 years." A collective gasp echoed through the church. Marcus's head shot upward, his expression rapidly changing from boredom to confusion, and then to a look of sheer terror. "That is impossible," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "She just sold lesson plans online. She made maybe $200 a month." Mr. Whitmore looked at him with the patient disdain of a teacher dealing with a particularly slow child. Mrs. Morrison was the sole owner and chief executive officer of EduSpark Digital, which is the largest independent platform for teacher resources in the United States. The company was founded before your marriage and was legally structured within a trust that ensured it remained completely separate from any marital assets. You were not aware of its existence simply because Mrs. Morrison chose not to tell you. Diana Morrison jumped to her feet. "This is fraud. She hid assets from her own husband. That is against the law." "It is perfectly legal," Mr. Whitmore replied calmly. "The company was started before the marriage. Its growth was financed entirely by its own profits, not by shared marital funds. I have 6 years of documentation that proves Mrs. Morrison built this business on her own, without any financial help from Mr. Morrison." "I suggest you sit down, Mrs. Morrison." Diana remained standing, trembling with fury, until Marcus finally pulled her back down into the seat. Marcus tried to regain his composure. I watched him straighten his tie and force his face into a calmer expression. "Fine," he said. "Whatever. As Hope's father, I will be the one to manage her trust until she is of age. The money will stay within the family." Mr. Whitmore did not even blink. "I am not finished, Mr. Morrison, and I think the next part will clarify your assumptions about parental rights." He pressed a button on a remote control, and a large screen lowered from the ceiling behind the coffin. Rachel's face appeared, recorded in her hospice bed just a few days before she died. She looked awful, so thin and pale, with deep, dark circles under her eyes. Her body was clearly giving out, but her eyes were bright, fierce, and had a hint of amusement that made my heart ache with both pride and sorrow. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was weak, but it carried clearly through the speakers. "Jessica, Diana, if you are watching this It means I am gone, and you are probably feeling quite pleased with yourselves right now." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "You might be shocked about the money, of course, but you think you can handle it. You think you will get custody of Hope, control her trust, and find some legal loophole that your expensive lawyers missed. You believe you have won, because you always believe you have won. People like you cannot even imagine a world where someone like me could outsmart you." She paused again, a small smile forming that sent a chill down my spine. "You have no idea what is about to happen, so sit down, be quiet, and pay attention." Class is in session. The video played on, and with each passing second, the entire world that Marcus, Jessica, and Diana Morrison had built for themselves began to crumble. "Jessica," Rachel said, "I want to thank you. I know that probably sounds strange, but just listen. When I first discovered your affair with my husband, I was completely devastated. I cried for 3 days without stopping. I thought my entire life was over, that everything I had built had been destroyed by a 28-year-old Instagram influencer who could not keep her hands to herself." She paused, and her smile became sharp. "But then, I got angry. And after that, I got smart. And when I started to dig into Marcus's secrets, I mean really dig deep, I found out something interesting about my own life. It was something I had never even thought to look into before." Documents suddenly appeared on the screen behind her, showing DNA test results with official formatting and a letterhead. "Marcus, Hope is not your daughter." The church erupted into chaos. People were shouting, gasping, and jumping to their feet. Marcus's face turned as white as a sheet, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. "I had an affair as well," Rachel continued, her voice remaining calm in the midst of the pandemonium. "It happened once, 3 years ago, just after I found out about your first big gambling debts. The ones you swore to me were a one-time thing. I met a man at an education conference who treated me with respect. He looked at me like I was a real person, not some prize to be shown off or a charity case to be fixed. He actually listened when I talked instead of just waiting for his turn to speak." She shrugged on the screen. "I am not proud of it. I was brought up to believe that marriage vows were sacred, but I am not sorry for it either. The DNA test is officially attached to my will. It has been witnessed and notarized. You have no biological connection to Hope. She has no parental rights and no legal claim to custody. A lawyer will contact the man who fathered her, and the decision to be in her life will belong to him and my daughter alone." Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. Next to him, Jessica sat frozen, the color washing out from her perfectly made-up face. "And now for Diana, my loving mother-in-law." Diana flinched as if she had been struck. Her carefully controlled expression shattered, revealing something foul beneath it. "Detective Brennan," Rachel's voice said, "I know you are in the audience. I specifically asked Tom to invite you. I saw Brennan making her way through the crowd. Her badge was already out, and her face held the calm, professional look of someone who knew this was coming. I have reason to believe Diana Morrison has been poisoning me," Rachel declared. "She did it with the herbal tea she brought to my hospital room each day. I kept the final cup. It is now being held by my attorney, Mr. Whitmore, as evidence, complete with a fully documented chain of custody." Diana scrambled to her feet and tried to get to the aisle. Brennan was already there, blocking her escape with an effortless move. "I also saved my own blood and hair samples from the hospital," Rachel added, "which are also documented and held as evidence. We expect the test results back any day. I believe they will show high levels of thallium. That is a heavy metal poison that creates symptoms like a natural illness and is almost impossible to find without very specific tests." Diana's voice rose to a shriek. This is ridiculous. She was paranoid. The pregnancy messed with her head. I never poisoned anybody. On the screen, Rachel seemed to have expected this very outburst. Diana will likely claim I was mentally unstable, that I was paranoid and delusional. But I was a straight A student and a national merit scholar. I created a $47 million company when everyone around me thought I was just making butterfly crafts. Does that sound like a person who has lost touch with reality? The third bombshell landed with the force of a physical blow. Marcus, let's discuss your job, particularly the $2.3 million in gambling debts you owe to some very dangerous people in Atlantic City. We should also talk about the money you have been stealing from Morrison and Associates to pay for it. A series of documents filled the screen. There were bank statements, wire transfers, and betting slips. It was a paper trail that twisted through shell corporations and foreign accounts, all of it perfectly organized and explained. I have already sent complete copies to the SEC, the FBI, the IRS, and your company's ethics committee. By Monday morning, your law license will be gone. By Friday, you will most likely be in jail. And as for those men in Atlantic City who have been waiting so patiently for their payment, they will be very interested to hear that their debtor can no longer afford to pay them. Marcus was shaking now, a visible tremor running through his body as sweat beaded on his forehead. His $3,000 suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume that no longer fit. But Rachel was not done. Oh, and Jessica, one last thing, my dear. Jessica, who had been trying to inch away from Marcus, froze completely. I know that you have been selling Marcus's insider trading secrets to Greg Holloway, his greatest business competitor. I have the emails, the Venmo records, and the text messages where you called Marcus a useful fool who is too self-absorbed to realize he is being manipulated. The screen displayed a text message conversation. Jessica's face crumbled. Marcus, your girlfriend has been systematically wrecking your career from the inside while you were so focused on wrecking me. She has been on your rival's side this entire time, giving him every bit of an important information you were foolish enough to tell her. You were convinced she was in love with you. She just saw you as a rung on her ladder. I suppose that makes the two of you a perfect match. Marcus spun toward Jessica, his eyes filled with pure rage. You were feeding information to Greg? Jessica's composure completely shattered. Marcus, I can explain everything. It is not what it looks like. I was only trying to protect myself if things fell apart. You were selling my secrets. I could end up in prison because of what you said. Oh, that is just perfect. Jessica's voice became a shrill cry. You are the one who stole money from your firm. You are the one with massive gambling debts. I just made sure I would be okay when you finally ruined everything. They stood in the front row of the church, screaming at each other, while 200 guests watched, and dozens of phones recorded their every word. My best friend's funeral had turned into the most shocking reality show anyone had ever seen. Never underestimate a quiet woman, Rachel's voice said from the screen, cutting through the noise. Still waters do not just run deep. Sometimes they conceal a tidal wave, and sometimes that tidal wave has spent 6 years patiently learning where every single fault line is. Police cars pulled up to St. Andrew's Church less than 20 minutes after Rachel's video concluded. Detective Brennan had radioed for backup after the second revelation. She knew what was about to happen and was ready to move on 6 years of carefully collected evidence. Diana Morrison was led out of the church in handcuffs, her protests echoing against the high ceiling. She yelled about her family's name, her powerful lawyers, and her social connections in Connecticut. None of it made a difference. The officer leading her to the waiting police car seemed completely unimpressed by her frantic objections. "I have rights," Diana screamed. "I demand to see my lawyer. This is slander. That woman was completely unhinged. I never laid a hand on anyone." The lab results were confirmed 2 days later. It was thallium, exactly as Rachel had predicted. It was a slow-acting poison that builds up in the body over time, making it look like an infection or organ failure. Diana had been giving it to her daughter-in-law for weeks, possibly months, with the cold precision of someone who had planned out every single move. She would now be in prison for the rest of her life. Marcus was handed federal subpoenas before he even left the church property. The SEC, the FBI, the IRS. His firm had fired him by the afternoon, releasing a statement that called him a disgrace to his profession and a total embarrassment to the legal field. All of his assets were frozen while the investigation proceeded. The plane tickets to Costa Rica, sitting in his desk, would go unused. The loan sharks came looking for him 3 days later. Marcus had been denied bail because he was a flight risk. So he was safely in a federal holding cell when two very large men arrived at his empty apartment, demanding their money. They left angry but not discouraged. Men like that always have long memories. Jessica Crane was arrested and charged with 17 counts of insider trading, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and being an accessory to financial crimes. Her booking photo was all over the internet in a matter of hours. Her mascara was smeared, her hair was a mess, and her designer dress was creased from her time in a cell. Her Instagram followers plunged from 87,000 to less than 8,000 in a single night. The comments were brutal. "This is what you get for choosing a married man over your own integrity. Imagine throwing away your entire life for a man who was already losing his." She really thought she was the star of the show. Plot twist, she was the warning. I witnessed the entire collapse from a distance, feeling a bizarre mix of victory and sorrow. Rachel had won her battle. She had outsmarted every person who had ever looked down on her, and she did it all after she was gone. But she was still gone, and no amount of revenge could ever change that. 2 weeks after the service, Greg Holloway reached out to me through Mr. Whitmore. When we met, he seemed nervous, constantly fiddling with his coffee cup in a way that did not fit the image of the ruthless tycoon Marcus always painted. He was 40 years old, successful, and dressed in a style that suggested wealth without being flashy, but his eyes were what really stood out to me. They were kind and honest, and they held the same deep sadness that I felt. "I was in love with her," he said softly, "with Rachel. We only had 3 months together, but I truly loved her. She was the most incredible woman I had ever known. She was brilliant and strong and funny, and she had no idea just how special she really was." He glanced down at his hands. She was hesitant to leave Marcus. She believed she could repair their marriage, that she could somehow save it. She kept telling me that she had made a vow and had to try everything possible before she could walk away. By the time she finally accepted the marriage could not be saved, she found out she was pregnant, and then her world began to crumble. He pulled out a photograph. It showed Rachel on a beach, smiling for the camera, with the wind blowing through her hair. She looked more joyful than I had seen her in a very long time, maybe ever. "I never knew about hope," Greg admitted. "Not until I heard about the funeral and the DNA test. Rachel never told me she was carrying my child. I believe she was trying to keep me safe, or maybe she was trying to protect herself. She was certain Marcus would ruin her life if he ever discovered the truth." He looked at me, his eyes now glistening with tears. "I want to be in Hope's life. I want to help raise her and provide her with everything Rachel would have wanted for her. This is not about the money or the inheritance or anything like that. It is because she is my daughter, and loving her is the only way I have left to keep loving her mother. I looked at him from across the table, this man that Rachel had chosen, even for a short and secret time. I could see what she must have seen in him. There was a kindness and an honesty, a realness in a world that was full of men like Marcus Morrison. Hope is going to need a father, I finally said. She will need someone who is going to love her for who she is, not for what she might represent. Are you able to be that person for her? Yes, he answered, with no hesitation at all. I can. I will. I give you my word, Claire. I made a promise to Rachel. Over the next few weeks, Greg and I worked out a custody plan. We agreed to share custody, with me serving as Hope's legal guardian and Greg being officially recognized as her biological father. He set up trust funds and a college savings plan, providing everything a child could ever possibly need. But he did more than just that. He was there every single day, without exception, figuring out how to change diapers, mix bottles, and sing the lullabies that sent Hope right to sleep. He was present because he chose to be, not out of any obligation. It was in those moments that I finally let myself think that everything might just turn out okay. A year went by, the seasons turned, the leaves fell and grew back, and life kept moving forward, even when grief made each step feel like an impossible task. I passed the bar exam on my very first attempt. I was now a licensed attorney, with Rachel as my inspiration and a newfound sense of purpose driving me. The trust provided me with a salary for being Hope's guardian. It was enough that I no longer had to stress about the rent. I could finally begin building the kind of future Rachel would have wanted for us. Hope was doing great. She was a happy, healthy 1-year-old who had her mother's eyes and her father's relaxed, joyful smile. She found humor in everything, was curious about everything, and lived with a simple joy that served as a constant reminder of why Rachel fought so fiercely to protect her. My own daughter, Lily, who was now 9, had taken on the role of Hope's official big sister. She would read her bedtime stories, help out during bath time, and tell anyone who would listen that her baby sister was the smartest and most beautiful baby in the whole world. Greg had relocated to New York to be near us. He found an apartment 2 floors above me in the same building, which was close enough for him to be a daily presence in Hope's life without disrupting the unusual little family we were creating. There was no romance between Greg and me. Our bond was something different, perhaps even stronger, a partnership in the most significant undertaking of our lives. Edgewood Park was still growing, now valued at $80 million, with forecasts suggesting it would reach $100 million within the year. Rachel had personally selected the new CEO, left behind specific instructions for the company's direction, and established an endowment. This endowment would provide scholarships for the children of single mothers for many generations. It was called the Betty Johnson Scholarship Fund, a tribute to the woman who spent her life working so her daughter could have chances she never did. Betty was now living comfortably in a house in Tennessee, which the trust had paid for. She had finally retired from the diner, stopped working double shifts, and now had the time to work in her garden and video call her granddaughter every Sunday afternoon. Hope's first birthday celebration was modest but absolutely perfect. My apartment was filled with pink balloons, a banner that Lily had made herself read, "Happy First Birthday, Hope," in crooked letters. Only a few people were there, but they were the most important ones. Lily, Greg, Betty, and Tom Whitmore, all people who had loved Rachel and would now love her daughter in her absence. I rolled a small television into the living room as our guests gathered around. Rachel left videos for Hope, I explained. She made one for every major life event. Her first birthday, her first day of school, her first heartbreak, her graduation, and her wedding day. She wanted me to play them. The room fell silent. Rachel's face filled the screen. She was lying in her hospice bed, but she had applied lipstick and fixed her hair, trying to look like herself as her body was failing her. You could see the medical equipment in the background, all the tubes and monitors that defined her last days, but she had framed the camera to make them less noticeable. That was so typical of Rachel, focusing on the small details even as she was facing death. "My darling Hope," she began, and her voice sounded weak, but it was full of a warmth and love that the recording could not contain. "Happy first birthday, my sweet girl. If you are seeing this, it means I am not there to hold you, to cover your cheeks with kisses, or to watch you smear cake all over yourself and giggle at the mess." She offered a smile, and in that instant she looked almost healthy, almost like the Rachel I had known for 25 years. "I am just so sorry that I couldn't stay. I fought with everything I had, Hope, more than I have ever fought for anything. But there are some fights you just can't win, at least not in the way you hope to. Sometimes being a fighter means knowing when it is time to let go, and trusting that the people you love will continue what you started." Her eyes were shining, but she did not cry. Rachel was always tougher than people realized. "There is something very important I need you to understand. Not everything I ever accomplished, everything that truly mattered, I did it all for you. The reason I built a company wasn't because I cared about money or success, or even proving people wrong, although I have to admit that part was nice. I built it because I knew you would need to be protected. I knew that people in this world would try to take what belongs to you, people who would look at you and only see an opportunity for themselves. I wanted you to be protected, to have resources, to be independent. I wanted you to be in a position where you never had to depend on anyone for survival. That way, when you decided to let someone into your life, it would be a real choice, not because you were desperate." She took a deep, unsteady breath. "Be brave, Hope. Be kind and be smart. Work hard, but never so hard that you forget how to laugh. Love with all your heart, but not so much that you lose who you are. Defend those who cannot defend themselves. And question everything, especially the people who insist you shouldn't question them. And Hope, there is one last thing. It is the most important thing I will ever tell you." She looked right into the camera, as if she was looking straight at us, across the screen, across time, and through death itself. "Never, ever allow anyone to convince you that you are nothing without them. You are everything. You are my entire world. You are Rachel Morrison's daughter. That means you have a strength inside you that nobody, not even you, understands yet. I will love you forever, no matter what happens or how far apart we may be. Happy birthday, my love." The video came to an end. Tears were flowing freely. Betty held a tissue to her face, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. Greg hugged Hope tightly, his own face wet with tears, whispering something that was too soft for any of us to overhear. Even Tom Whitmore, who had always maintained a purely professional demeanor, was dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. Lily leaned against me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "She's not actually gone, is she, Mom?" she asked. I hugged her close and replied, "As long as Hope has these videos to watch, no, sweetheart, she's not gone at all." 3 days after the party, a letter showed up at my new law office. There was no return address, but the postmark was from the federal prison where Marcus was waiting for his trial. My hands were steady as I opened it. Nothing he could say could possibly hurt me or Rachel. He couldn't touch the new life we had built from the ruins of his betrayal. The letter was short. "Claire, this isn't over. My legal team is examining the DNA results. Something isn't right, and once I can prove that Hope is my daughter, I'm going to fight for custody. I'm going to take the trust. I am going to take back everything that Rachel took from me. I'll see you in court. Marcus. I should have felt a wave of fear. A year before, a letter like that would have thrown me into a complete panic. But I had spent the last 12 months learning to think just like Rachel, preparing for every possible outcome, gathering information, and organizing documents. I was ready for this moment. I reached for my phone. Tom, it's Claire. He sent a letter. Yes, he's threatening a custody battle. I know. Rachel was prepared for this. I opened a drawer in my desk. Inside was a thick file that I had never touched before. On the cover, in Rachel's neat script, it said, Phase 2, open only if he threatens Hope. I broke the seal and started to read. It was filled with documents, pictures, audio recordings, and a USB drive simply labeled insurance. There was also a handwritten letter from my best friend, written in the last weeks of her life. Claire, if you're reading this, it means Marcus is still causing trouble. Some men just don't know when to quit. You can knock them down, but they just get back up and start swinging again. It's not because they think they can win, but because fighting is the only way they know how to live. Phase 1 involved the funeral, the public exposure, his arrest, and the complete humiliation. I was hoping that would be enough. I hoped he would just disappear and leave Hope alone. But I knew him, Claire. I knew him better than he knew himself. That's why I created Phase 2. He has no clue what I discovered during the 6 years I spent documenting his crimes, the evidence I saved, the things I kept hidden, waiting for this exact situation. He thinks the funeral was the end of it. He's convinced I played my entire hand. He is mistaken. Finish him, Claire. Do it for me, for Hope, and for every woman who has ever been told she is worthless without the man who is breaking her spirit. Love always, Rachel. P.S. Tell Hope that her mama says hi, and tell Marcus checkmate. A smile formed on my face, the same one Rachel had in her hospital video. It was confident, fierce, and ready for a fight. Rachel, I whispered, you were a brilliant, scary, and absolutely magnificent woman. Just how many more surprises did you have planned? I began to go through the contents of the folder. It contained names, dates, and proof of crimes that made the revelations at the funeral seem like minor infractions. It was more than enough evidence to put Marcus away for the rest of his life, to completely ruin what was left of his name, and to make sure he could never harm Hope or anybody else ever again. Through my office window, the city stretched out in every direction. Millions of lives playing out their own personal stories. Somewhere in federal custody, Marcus Morrison was likely patting himself on the back for that threatening letter. He was probably imagining he still had some control, some moves to make, some kind of a chance. He was completely wrong. Rachel had made certain of that. I took out my phone to call Tom Whitmore, to set Phase 2 into motion, to finish what my best friend had started. Justice takes its time, I thought to myself, remembering the words that appeared on the screen at the end of Rachel's memorial video. But it never forgets, and neither would I. And that is the story of how Rachel Morrison, a woman that everybody underestimated, a woman they called trailer trash and boring and nothing without her husband, proved every single one of them wrong from beyond the grave. She taught all of us something very important that day. Never underestimate a quiet woman. Never think that her silence means she is weak. And never, ever make the mistake of believing that money and power will shield you from the consequences of your own cruelty. If this story touched you, if it made you angry or gave you hope, or reminded you of your own inner strength, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you were in Rachel's shoes? Would you have fought back in the same way that she did? And if you know somebody who needs to hear this story today, someone who might be feeling trapped or powerless or like they are completely out of options, please share this with them. Sometimes a story is the one thing someone needs to remember just how strong they really are. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you do not miss the next story, because on this channel, we believe in justice, we believe in karma, and we believe that it is the quiet ones who are always the most dangerous. The lesson from Rachel's story is simple but life-changing. Never let anyone define your worth. Build quietly, plan carefully, and when the time comes, let your success speak louder than their cruelty ever could. If this story inspired you, gave you hope, or reminded you of your own hidden strength, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in Rachel's place? Share this with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated is actually their greatest advantage. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of justice, karma, and quiet power. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next story. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration to our audience. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I will see you in the next story.